So this black and gray striped top is the inspiration for my whole look. I got it at a thrift store along with a black top that had a great ruffled button front and this lace dress, and each piece was anywhere from $2 to $4. The dress is a tape lace or like a Battenberg lace or Renaissance lace, and I plan to split that into many appliques and use it to tie the whole thing together. After doing a very rough sketch to get my ideas together, I set about deconstructing my shirts. The black and gray striped top was just a bit too tight in the bust and a little bit uncomfortable. So adding the black ruffle from the other shirt will not only add a bit of decoration, but it gives me an inch or two of width where I need it. I ended up with an extra piece of ruffle from the collar of the black shirt, which I haven't decided exactly how I'm going to use it, but it'll probably end up embellishing the collar of the new shirt. Now, the bottom of my original shirt is high-waisted and flares out just a bit. I want mine to be much more fitted, a lot shorter, and I'm going to have it come to a bit of a point in the front and the back. So I'm going to remove that section, recut it, and I'll have some extra fabric left over that I can use somewhere else. Now, I'd like to put some boning in for structure, but I'm not sure if I'm going to have the time, and I don't have the boning, so I'm going to give myself pretty generous seam allowances, which will give me the option of adding boning in later. I'm rolling the hem and getting ready to sew that, but when I sew the top of the bottom piece to the bottom of the top piece, I'm going to leave the part where the boning would go in unsewn. That way I can just slide it in if I decide to. On the edges where the buttonholes are, I'm just hand stitching those because my machine will not like the thickness of that fabric. Now, partway through the last step, I realized I was making a mistake. I had forgotten to allow for the inch that I was adding to the top when I cut the bottom piece, and so I was going to end up with an inch wide gap. But as I was making the mistake, I realized there's kind of a cool way to cover it that will add a little bit of visual detail, so I went ahead and just went with it, and I'm now using some of my extra fabric to make a panel. This panel is going to have some buttons, and it's going to come from the center of the shirt and button over onto the side. So it gives me a little bit of asymmetry, which is kind of a theme in everything that I make. Adding this panel also gives me an opportunity to break out my rarely used button collection. I have a lot of beautiful buttons that just sit in a container waiting for their moment to be used. I started off with these really pretty bright blue buttons which have a flower pattern that's hard to see on the video, and that was just a little bit too cutesy and it would only go with one style. I really like these red buttons for their color. I absolutely love black and gray with red, but I also felt like it was just too specific as far as what I'd be able to pair it with. I realized since I'm going for a steampunk look, the smart thing to do would be to go with a metallic button. That way it will match with several other pieces. I like to make everything mix and matchable. That way I don't always have to be stuck in a certain costume and everything has more versatility. These buttons are for show only, they're just a facade, so I'm going to use hook and eye closures on the back to actually keep the shirt together. I didn't get footage of me taking apart the first piece of my lace dress, but there it is on the back, and since I have a ton of hand sewing in my future that I am not excited about, on to the bottom. I've amassed a pretty good crinoline collection, and after vetoing certain ones by color, I ended up on what I think is my favorite one, this dusty brown and pink. For the top, I'm making a 4-tiered striped skirt. I love this bold stripe, and I plan on giving it kind of an ombre effect with dye, but I decided to cut it first and dye it layer by layer. The top 2 layers ended up being 5 inches, the third layer is 6 inches, and the fourth layer is 7. My vision for the skirt is a dark gray, almost black at the top that fades down to a pale gray. At the very bottom, I wanted a rim of pink that almost looks like it's bleeding up into the rest of the skirt. But in order to get just the right pink, I did have to do a little bit of experimenting with the dyes that I already have. I then mixed a pretty weak batch of black dye and started to dye the lighter sections first. And for the bottom section, I'm just rolling it up and giving it a dip because I don't want it to take on much dye at all. I'm going to then just set it aside and let it marinate for a bit. I'm removing the middle section first so that the top section can sit in the black just a little bit longer. And since I don't really care about the evenness of this, it's okay if it's a bit kind of splotchy and drippy, I'm going to darken the top section by adding a little bit more concentrated dye right to the bath. I can now mix up a proper batch of the pink dye, and I'm just going to let it rest on the edge of the bowl so that it can sort of reverse bleed, like soak up into the rest of the strip. I then set each strip by tossing it into an ice bath with some laundry detergent and washing it out by hand. Getting it all pinned and sewn together was a bit of an ordeal because each piece was so much longer than the next, but I eventually got it together. First thing I noticed is that it came out exactly how I pictured it in my mind, and the second thing I realized is that the color is entirely too subtle. So after putting it all together, I had to roll it back up, re-dye the top and the bottom without making any drips or bleeds, and it was very nerve-wracking and I didn't take footage of it. I am, however, so happy that I did that because here is the finished product. I love the bolder color. My one little gripe would be that in person the dark gray is a bit more purpley than I would prefer, but for this look, I'm actually not that worried about it. I really love the skirt. And that's it for the first half of this project. I hope to finish it up either this week or next week, and when I do, I will show you how it all came together.